Hello, welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. We have another 3 stories for you today. Store policy. Supervisor wants me to have a buy-off on every first part. And no data on personal laptops. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new here and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Alright, let's get started. Our first story. Store policy. This was years ago. I am talking about 2004 to 2005. I am not complaining here, I am simply pointing out an event I personally found funny. We had a new manager take over our grocery store that I worked at. He wanted us to follow the policy book to the letter, and I mean to the letter. A tad bit unrealistic, but he was super polite about it and said he was just trying to protect everyone's jobs. I thought this was nice of him, but at the same time, several of us tried to point out that some of the policies needed revision. One of the things in the policy book was that we were to charge everyone who wanted cigarettes or alcohol. It did not matter if it was extremely obvious that they were of age, it said in the policy book to card everyone, including any people with the person paying. If there were little kids, then this was, of course, an exception. They couldn't possibly have ID. So, all the employees started complying with this policy. There were grumblings by customers, but we were just doing our job. The customers seemed to understand but would let the manager know how ridiculous they felt the policy was when it was extremely obvious as to who was old enough to purchase tobacco and alcohol without needing a card. But policy was policy, after all. Well, one day I was working, and I had a woman come into my line with a couple bottles of wine, and who was with her? The store manager, off the clock, said it was him and his wife. Now let's remember that store policy is to card everyone, no exceptions, aside from little kids. So, what do? I asked for both of them to provide ID. My boss looks at me and says, "Isn't it obvious we are of age? I am your boss as well. Certainly, you don't need to card us." I smiled and kindly reminded him what the store policy was and pointed out that it was in the policy book that cashiers were required to card everyone, no matter if they were obviously of age. I also reminded him how he told all employees this was to be strictly enforced to protect our jobs. He just stares at me blankly. It's like he can't believe I am following exactly what he said to do. His wife had already handed me her ID, and I looked at him and said, "Well, where is your ID? If it's store policy, then it's store policy." It wasn't long after that he contacted corporate to ask that the policy be revised. A few weeks later, we were handed a new policy book, and the new policy on cigarette and alcohol sales was to card if the purchaser looked under 40 years of age. Again, I am not complaining here. I just thought this situation was funny. Our next story. Supervisor wants me to have a buy-off on every first part. I am a machinist in a CNC aerospace shop. I've been here for 4 years, never worked a different shop, and everything I know I've learned from this shop. The machines I run are multi-pallet machines that can hold over 20 parts each and are completely automated with the exception of the loading and unloading of parts and tooling. One machine holds over 300 tools, and the other holds almost 200 tools. A few years ago, when I was taught how these machines run and essentially made into the primary operator for these machines, I was told to have every first part bought off on each order that runs, even if the next order is the same part as the previous order. My supervisor was really cool to me, and I enjoyed working with him. This buys-off policy started because someone kept running parts and not checking them properly and scrapped thousands of dollars in parts. For about a month straight, people were getting write-ups for not having their buy-offs done. To save myself the hassle, I decided I would be extremely meticulous about making sure my parts were bought off properly every time. I would end up with 3 to 5 orders of parts running back to back, and I would run the first part of each order, take 5 different parts to my lead, and have them go through the 15-20 minute process of buying them off, and would not run the machines until the parts were fully bought off. I caused dozens of hours of downtime on the machines during this month because sometimes there wasn't an available lead to check my parts, even though I checked them myself very thoroughly after they were finished. After a month of lost time and profits due to expediting the parts for processing and shipping, the owner called me in for a meeting and asked why my machines weren't running all the time. I told him, "Lead supervisor wants a buy-off on every order that runs, so until the parts are bought off, I don't run the machines." After that meeting, the policy changed to checking parts and keeping running at the discretion of the operator and only needing buy-offs if something was measured wrong. It was a new part we've reprogrammed, never made before, or we haven't run in a while. First part A buy-off is where a lead or supervisor would check the first part to make sure all dimensions are correct at the beginning of the order, so we can correct any errors in programming or tooling without scrapping entire orders due to avoidable issues. And our last story. No data on personal laptops. I was an IT contractor working for a very large consultancy, let's call them McTinder, on a client site, we'll call them 4, as part of their telephony data warehouse implementation team. I arrived on day 1 and was immediately shrugged off by the project manager. This guy had spent a lot of time schmoozing me, and to receive a cold shoulder when I arrived showed what kind of outfit this was. I should have known. I had encountered them in previous projects, but never directly. I digress. A colleague, more senior, took me to complete a training session. It consisted of a 10-minute PowerPoint on security, a 10-minute crash course on the project, and a 2-hour knowledge transfer on my deliverables. Being somewhat professional, I had brought my personal laptop to handle the first few days, knowing that IT in these organizations can be a little slow. The first slide said, no personal devices may be used to hold or process client data. Fine, not a problem. I could work on the client's SharePoint, just using the laptop for access until mine arrived. My personal credentials were given permission to access the working directories. Fast forward 5 months and 3 weeks. I am about to exit the project. The PM from McTinder calls me aside and hands me the most beat up pile of crap laptop I've ever seen. Here's your laptop. Sorry it's late. You need to work from this from now on. This thing had maybe 9 keys attached and sounded like a Rolls-Royce Trent engine on takeoff. It was useless. I booted up the pile of junk. I had been handed no access to the documents I had created. I asked the PM again. No, he said, no personal devices. Consider yourself lucky, not everyone gets a laptop this nice. So, I sat there for 2 more weeks, waiting for the IT team to give me editor access to the documents I had spent 6 months putting together. After I left, I deleted any local copies from my personal device and deleted the user IDs from my own domain. I was told by a colleague in 4's project team that McTinder's IT team had managed to delete the docs and had tried to reach out to get local copies. By then, I had handed the junk laptop back, and remember, no personal devices. Well, that's all for this video. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you all in the next one.